And we are back for prepping for winter with the Arianne sample chapter. When we last left Arianne, she had left on a quest to treat with Aegon and Jon Connington. She is oddly accompanied by her ex-boyfriend Daemon Sand, who seems intent on ruining the mission, and by Oberyn's bastard daughter Elia, who is quite a bit like Lyanna Stark. They have arrived at Ghost Hill, and the Tollans have told them that the Golden Company has taken half of Cape Wrath in the Stormlands. And now let's continue. "Is Dorne at risk?" Lady Nymella asked. "I confess, each time I see a strange sail, my heart leaps to my throat. What if these ships turn south? The best part of the Tollans' strength is with Lord Ironwood in the Boneway. Who will defend Ghost Hill if these strangers land upon our shores? Should I call my men home?" "Your men are needed where they are, my lady," Daemon Sand assured her. Arianne was quick to nod. Any other counsel would well lead to Lord Ironwood's host unraveling like an old tapestry, as each man rushed home to defend his own lands against supposed enemies who might or might not ever come. "Once we know beyond a doubt whether these be friends or foes, my father will know what to do," the princess said. So we find out that the Tollan forces are with Anders Ironwood. So I do wonder if and when the code word war is given, what will happen to the Tollans? If the Ironwoods head into war, will the Tollans follow? Or do they have more independence? Nymella Tolland appears to have the ability to call her forces home. Does she have the ability to give other commands? In both the Battle of Ice and the Battle of Fire, we have hosts with mixed loyalties. The Freys and the Manderleys are definitely not on the same page, and the Karstarks within Stannis' host were not true. The sellswords of Slaver's Bay keep swapping sides, and no one knows what side the Volantene fleet is going to come down on. Interestingly, and quite boldly, Daemon Sand leaps to answer Lady Nymella. This is of course not his place at all, as he's just a mere sworn shield to the Princess of Dorne. Arianne meekly nods to Daemon Sand's words. I certainly couldn't imagine any of the Kingsguard jumping in for Robert Joffrey or Tywin. Daemon seems to know what Dorne wants and doesn't give Arianne the opportunity to answer. Arianne then follows up being upstaged by her sworn shield by deferring action to her father. It's a rather weak moment for Arianne. It was then that pasty, pudgy Tiora raised her eyes from the cream cakes on her plate. "It is dragons." "Dragons?" said her mother. "Tiora, don't be mad." "I'm not." "They're coming." "How could you possibly know that?" her sister asked, with a note of scorn in her voice. "One of your little dreams." Tiora gave a tiny nod, chin trembling. "They were dancing in my dream, and everywhere the dragons danced, the people died." So Tiora joins the ranks of a number of other characters who have dragon dreams. This includes Egg and his brothers, Daemon Blackfyre II, Tyrion, Dany, Shireen, and Quentyn. Now it's been said that those with Targaryen blood are the ones having dragon dreams, but this pretty much puts that theory to rest. We have absolutely no reason to think that Tiora Toland has any Targaryen or Valyrian blood in her. Now it's interesting that Tiora says that the dragons are dancing. The Dance of the Dragons was when Targaryens fought Targaryens, and when dragons fought dragons. Right now a conflict does seem to be brewing between Aegon and Dany, but Aegon has no dragon. If there is going to be a second Dance of the Dragons, it remains a mystery how Aegon will acquire one. Perhaps Arch and Drink, being Ironwood supporters, will bring one over. Now, although dreams are often thought of as prophetic, we also know that people can send dreams to each other, and we know of at least two methods to do so, the weirwood net and the glass candles. If Tiora is getting sent messages, the mystery is who is sending them, and why bother sending them to a random girl from House Toland? For Arianne's benefit? Why not just send the dreams straight to Arianne then? "Seven save us," Lady Nymella gave an exasperated sigh. "If you did not eat so many cream cakes, you would not have such dreams. Rich foods are not for girls your age when your humors are so unbalanced. Maester Tommen says—" "I hate Maester Tommen," Tiora said. Then she bolted from the table, leaving her lady mother to make apologies for her. So it should be noted that humors is a reference to a past pseudoscience that held that bodily fluids can get out of balance. Leeching was one method to put these humors back into balance. Tiora is apparently getting leeched by Maester Tommen to deal with her dreams, and that's why she doesn't like him. And with that, we see parallels to a few other dreamers out there. If you remember back in A Game of Thrones, Bran was plagued by dreams, and Maester Luwin would give him sweet sleep for suppressing them. A Clash of Kings opens with Shireen having dragon dreams and Maester Crescent trying to convince her that they're nothing. And in A Feast for Crows, Maester Coleman leeches our troubled hero Sweet Robin and gives him sweet sleep as well. And so we definitely see a pattern here. The Maesters are either not comfortable with people having prophetic dreams, or not comfortable with the telepathic awakening that can accompany dreams. "Be gentle with her, my lady," Arianne said. "I remember when I was her age. My father despaired of me, I'm sure." "I can attest to that." Sir Damon took a sip of wine and said, "House Toland has a dragon on its banners." "A dragon eating its own tail, aye," Valena said, "from the days of Aegon's conquest. He did not conquer here. Elsewhere he burned his foes, him and his sisters, but here we melted away before them, leaving only stone and sand for them to burn. And round the dragons went, snapping at their tails for want of any other food, till they were tied in knots." "Our forebears played their part in that," Lady Nemella said proudly. "Bold deeds were done, and brave men died. All of it was written down by the maesters who served us. We have books if my princess would like to know more." "Some other time, perhaps," said Arianne. So here we hear about the past resistance of House Toland against the Targaryens. According to the Tolands, the people melted away, leaving no food for the dragons. I imagine what went down is people took their crops, livestock, and fish into the chalk mines and bunkered down. Now, quite astonishingly, the Toland Maesters actually recorded how to defeat dragons in battle, and it appears that the Tolands themselves are familiar with the content. Coupling this knowledge with the dragon book in Arianne's tower, which is probably Barth's unnatural history, this means the Dornish likely know more about dragons than anyone else in our story. At minimum, they definitely know how to kill dragons. Of course, in the Princess and the Tower chapter, Arianne passed up the opportunity to research dragons, and here she passes up the opportunity again. As Ghost Hill slept that night, the princess donned a hooded cloak against the chill and walked the castle battlements to clear her thoughts. Daemon Sand found her leaning on a parapet and gazing out to the sea, where the moon was dancing on the water. "Princess," he said, "you ought to be abed." "I could say the same of you." Arianne turned to gaze upon his face. A good face, she decided. The boy I knew has become a handsome man. His eyes were as blue as a desert sky, his hair the light brown of the sands they had just crossed. A close-cropped beard followed the thin of a strong jaw, but could not quite hide the dimples when he smiled. I always loved his smile. So our next scene begins with what may be a little mirror to Theon back at Winterfell. He would also walk the battlements to clear his thoughts, and Theon would also visit the Godswood to be seen by the werewoods, while here Arianne is being seen by the moon. The moon is an instrument of faraway communication utilized by the Stark wolf pack, and probably also utilized by glass candles. Daemon Sand appears and Arianne reflects on how much she likes him. Arianne's emotions again highlight what an outrageously peculiar move it was for Doran to make Daemon Sand Arianne's sworn shield. The Bastard of God's Grace was one of Doran's finest swords as well, as might be expected from one who had been Prince Oberyn's squire, and had received his knighthood from the Red Viper himself. Some said that he had been her uncle's lover too, though seldom to his face. Arianne did not know the truth of that. He had been her lover, though. At 14 she had given him her maidenhead. Daemon had not been much older, so their coupling had been as clumsy as they were ardent. Still, it had been sweet. So we hear a bit more about Daemon Sand's backstory, namely that he is a great fighter like Oberyn Martell, and was perhaps his lover. It is a bit striking that everything keeps coming back to Oberyn with Arianne. Darkstar, who Arianne lusted after, is related to Oberyn earlier, and now Daemon Sand, who Arianne is currently lusting after, is related to Oberyn as well. As I mentioned before, Arianne used to sexually fantasize about her uncle, and perhaps her taste in men is influenced by this. Now there is something else of note about Arianne and Daemon's relationship. Arianne and Daemon were children together, and were about the same age, and were in love. Now perhaps they were too young to be having sex, but for the most part the relationship is normal. It's two peers being together. Arianne even calls it sweet, and this is to be contrasted with a full-grown man being with a child. Sir Daemon's face was stone. "Have you forgotten, princess? I am bastard-born." He took her hand in his. "If I am unworthy of this hand, how can I be worthy of your cunt?" She snatched her hand away. "You deserve a slap for that. My face is yours. Do what you will." So Arianne's attempt to seduce Daemon Sand fails, and Arianna's failure in utilizing her sexuality is now becoming a running theme. Keep in mind, Arianna relied pretty heavily on sexual manipulation as a means of power in the past. Her relationship with Garen and Dre over the years seemed to have a bit of it in it, and of course it's how she controlled Sir Aerys Oakheart. Since Sir Aerys, though, it hasn't worked out so well. Arianna thought she could wear sexy clothes to make her father uncomfortable, and Doran simply ignored her for days. She then tried to be friendly to Balon Swan and found him unresponsive. And now Daemon Sand is resistant. Ironically, Daemon Sand's sexual power seems to control Arianna more than the reverse. Of course, using sex and one's attractiveness to gain power is a reoccurring theme in Ice and Fire. Asha does it, Mel does it, Sansa is learning to do it, even Jon does it to gain power over Ygritte. But Arianna's situation most mirrors Cersei and Dany. Cersei controlled many of her pieces like Jaime, Lancel, and the Kettleblacks with her sexuality, as did Dany with her control of Drogo and Jorah. But it was Taena Merryweather who ended up controlling Cersei with her sexuality, and Daario had some control over Dany with his sexuality. Dany and Cersei also both faced situations where their sexual power was taken from them and they had to shift their strategies. Dany seemed to have no sexual sway over Xaro and Karth or Hisdar and Meereen, and Cersei is sexually depowered with her head shaving and walk of shame, at least according to Kevin. We are left to wonder if Arianna, sexually depowered, will eventually rely on her wits as a player in the Game of Thrones. What I will, you will not, it seems. So be it. Talk with me instead. Could this truly be Prince Aegon? Gregor Clegane ripped Aegon out of Elia's arms and smashed his head against a wall, Sir Daemon said. If Lord Connington's prince has a crushed skull, I will believe that Aegon Targaryen has returned from the grave. Elsewise, no. This is some feigned boy, no more. A sellsword's ploy to win support. My father fears the same. So once again, we have a critical Daemon Sand putting his bias into this diplomatic mission. Before he was claiming that Jon Con was dead, and if not dead, a bad person anyway, and now he's claiming the same of Aegon. Interestingly, Daemon slips and calls Aegon Lord Connington's prince, so I guess he does believe Jon Con is alive. Now Daemon Sand has little reason to believe that Aegon is dead. He wasn't there, babies are hard to identify to begin with, and they're even harder to identify once their heads are smashed in. Not to mention, Daemon only has hearsay to go on. He actually has no reason to be firm in his beliefs, and yet he is. And then Arianna specifically tells us that Daemon is repeating the fears of her father. So Doran put a man on this mission repeating his words. This all points to the idea that Doran wants this diplomatic mission to fail. If not, though, if this truly is Jon Connington, if the boy is Rhaegar's son, are you hoping that he is, or that he's not? It would give great joy to my father if Elia's son were still alive. He loved his sister well. It was you I asked about, not your father. So it was. I was 7 when Elia died. They say I held her daughter Rhaenys once, when I was too young to remember. Aegon will be a stranger to me, whether true or false. The princess paused. We looked for Rhaegar's sister, not his son. And now Daemon asks a very interesting question about whether Arianna is happy about Aegon's return. Her answer is, he's a stranger, true or false. Now I would say it's safe to assume that Doran would have come to the same conclusion about Arianna, that she wouldn't care about Aegon, true or false. In fact, Arianna already proved that she doesn't care about blood with the queen-making adventure. She was ready to go to war against her brother, Quentyn. If her own brother doesn't yield any loyalty or obligation, why would a cousin that she never met? And so now this diplomatic mission is looking really quite bankrupt. Remember, this is not an impressive lot. It's filled with bastards and knights from lesser houses. It has Arianna's ex-lover who wanted to marry her and seems intent on convincing Arianna that the other side is filled with charlatans. And now we find out it's being led by a woman who honestly doesn't care about its success. Blood by itself is meaningless to Arianna. Remember, Jon Con and Haldon's entire strategy is to get Dorne's allegiance not through marriage, lands, or money, but through an obligation to Elia. And here we find out Arianna feels no such obligation. Arianna barely knew Elia, and Aegon is a complete and utter stranger. And so we find that the Arianna quest is simply designed to fail on a fundamental level. Why send a person with a proven track record of not having loyalty to blood to possibly form an alliance based on loyalty to blood? Something is extremely off here, and we are left wondering what Doran is actually planning. Her father had confided in Sir Daemon when he chose him as his daughter's shield. With him at least, she could speak freely. I would sooner it were Quentyn who'd returned. Or so you say, said Daemon Sand. Good night, princess. He bowed to her and left her standing there. What did he mean by that? Arianne watched him walk away. What sort of sister would I be if I did not want my brother back? It was true, she had resented Quentyn for all those years that she had thought their father meant to name him as his heir in place of her. But that turned out just to be a misunderstanding. She was the heir to Dorne, she had her father's word on that. Quentyn would have his dragon queen, Daenerys. So here Daemon Sand essentially accuses Arianne of disliking her brother, which I suppose is a pretty reasonable accusation considering she almost started a war against Quentyn, and she just told Daemon that blood isn't very important. Now our story has quite a bit of sibling rivalry in it, of varying intensity. Consider for a moment the relationships of Asha versus Theon, or Sansa versus Arya, Viserys versus Dany, Robert versus Stannis versus Renly, Aeron versus Euron versus Victarion, Cat versus Lysa, Jaime versus Cersei versus Tyrion. Even Jon secretly dreamed of being Lord of Winterfell over Robb and felt quite guilty about it. Now obviously a big part of this is that feudalism breeds family resentment, in that one child inherits everything, and there is a financial incentive to commit fratricide. But there seems to be more to this than just money. Sansa and Arya, for example, were rivals without really contemplating inheritance. Arianne had a feudalistic reason for hating Quentyn, but now that reason has supposedly been removed. Yet Arianne is still clearly struggling with her feelings about Quentyn. Is she feeling guilty about hating him? Is she jealous of his supposed kingship? Does she not think he's going to be successful? Daemon Sand has highlighted this rivalry, causing Arianne to dwell on it. And we should never forget that this rivalry essentially began because Doran sent Quentyn away, and it was exacerbated because Doran left a letter out for Arianne to find, promising Dorne to Quentyn. In Sunspear hung a portrait of Princess Daenerys, who had come to Dorne to marry one of Arianne's forebears. In her younger days, Arianne had spent hours gazing at it, back when she was just a pudgy, flat-chested girl on the cusp of maidenhood, who prayed every night for the gods to make her pretty. 100 years ago, Daenerys Targaryen came to Dorne to make a peace. Now another comes to make a war, and my brother will be her king and consort. King Quentyn. Why did that sound so silly? Now we find out that Arianne spent hours staring at a portrait of Dornish Daenerys, which means she would likely know the history of this first Daenerys. And history is actually pretty important here, as it tends to repeat itself in A Song of Ice and Fire. Dornish Daenerys was the sister of King Daeron II and half-sister of Daemon Blackfyre. In a double marriage deal, Daeron married Mariah Martell, and his sister Daenerys married Mariah's brother, Meryn Martell. This brought Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms, but at the same time, the fear of Dornish influence over the king helped start the Blackfyre Rebellion. It was also rumored that Daemon Blackfyre was in love with Dornish Daenerys and was angry about her marriage to Meryn. Now the parallel isn't perfect, but a supposed marriage of Arianne to Viserys and a later supposed marriage of Quentyn to Dany would somewhat fit this story. We have Martell siblings marrying Targaryen siblings, with one of them being named Daenerys. And we have Aegon taking over the role of Daemon Blackfyre, wanting to marry Daenerys instead. And this all highlights a coming conflict. The Martells want to marry Dany, and Aegon wants to marry Dany. Both can't happen. And Arianne will eventually find all of this out. What happens next is a big mystery. Does Arianne assume a Quentyn-Dany marriage happened and then tells that to Aegon? I suppose this could make Aegon into a spurned suitor like Daemon Blackfyre, creating an Aegon-Dany divide. Or does she assume the opposite, that Quentyn isn't going to be king? Of course, without a Quentyn kingship, the Arianne-Quentyn rivalry over Dorne would suddenly be back on the table as far as Arianne knows. Perhaps she would be looking for allies against Quentyn and wanting to create an Aegon-Dany divide. Almost as silly as Quentyn riding a dragon. Her brother was an earnest boy, well-behaved and dutiful, but dull. And plain, so plain. The gods had given Arianne the beauty she had prayed for, but Quentyn must have prayed for something else. His head was overlarge and sort of square, his hair the color of dried mud, his shoulders slumped as well, and he was too thick about the middle. He looks too much like father. So Arianne gives a description of who she thinks Quentyn is. Now we've probably gotten more physical description of Quentyn than any other character in our story. Arianne, Dany, and Quentyn himself go into quite a bit of detail. I imagine this is because Quentin's description matches that of a young George R. R. Martin. "I love my brother," said Arianne, though only the moon could hear her. Though if truth be told, she scarcely knew him. Quentin had been fostered by Lord Anders of House Ironwood the Blood Royal, the son of Lord Ormond Ironwood, and grandson of Lord Edgar. So, interestingly enough, the moon is said to be listening to Arianne, and I do wonder if a glass candle is watching her at this moment. Anyway, although Arianne claims that she loves her brother, we find out that she doesn't really know Quentin. And this is of course the exact same criticism that she gave for Aegon. Aegon will be a stranger to me whether true or false. And Quentin is a stranger too. All she really knows about him is that he's been raised by Lord Ironwood, who believes that men should rule over women. And that's all for now. We'll wrap things up in Arianne I, Part 5.